Oh, right. It looks like we're full, basically, but we still have 3 minutes, so we're going to start a little bit early.
Are we? No, we should.
We're going to do introductions, because they closed the door, which means they're not going to let other people in.
Sounds like fun on a bun.
So,
let's do it.
Hi. So, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come listen to us be nerds. We highly appreciate it.
Just out of curiosity, how many of you have been to one of our panels before?
Hey!
Oh, hey! Repeat customers.
faces.
Amazing. Love it.
Thank
Love
you.
it. For the rest of you, I am so sorry / you're welcome.
Yes. So just so you know that we're not randos and we do have a reason to be up here, let's do some introductions. Hi, my name is Caitlin Farthing. I am an art historian and conservator / restorer. I currently work in disaster restoration. My specialty in art history is what I call, or what most people call, visual narrative shorthand. In video games, it's called scenic storytelling or environmental storytelling. I love how we use visuals to communicate information that cannot be communicated via language, via text, via words. And to my left is the singular most wonderful, intelligent human on the planet, not biased. This is my husband.
Hello. Yeah. My name is Alex. I teach. I'm currently pulling double duty at Westchester University, where I'm a lecturer in music history, theory, and literature. I'm also a lecturer at Boston University, where I'm also a lecturer in music history, where I teach a class on blues. So the reason I'm a lecturer is not because I don't want to get a full-time position, but it's actually easier to have a lecturership because you don't have to deal with any of the logistics. So that's kind of a nice thing. You just show up, you do your job, and you leave, and then nobody bothers you with committees and meetings and shit like that. And it's awesome, actually. Like, more,
Yeah.
like, you know. So my specialty in research is I did my dissertation on jazz, but lately I've been moving closer towards the cross-media pollination of music, so like film soundtracks, video game soundtracks, things of that nature, and how they also tell a story. So for this panel, which is called Wake Up Samurai, Science Fiction and Critiquing Systems of Power, I'm actually going to move this a little closer so I can actually talk into the microphone as opposed to around it. So for this panel, we are going to be talking about a number of things, but basically the thrust of this panel is that it is examining structures of power and authority in science fiction, how science fiction handles those ideas, and how video games reframe that idea of power and control by giving it to the player.
Yes, and particularly how video games will use sci-fi and sci-fi aesthetics and sci-fi tropes and sci-fi storytelling to critique systems of power instead of player agency and player choice. So
just to kind of give you a lecture outline, just so you're not, you know what you're in for, because I hate like surprising people, like, oh, I thought you were going to talk about this. Well, no, it's all right there.
Yes.
So we're going to start with talking about tropes of science fiction and liberalism, particularly vis-a-vis Starship Troopers, the 1959 Robert Heinlein novel, and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick from 1968. These novels were chosen as very salient jumping off points because they address a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about with our video games, which are going to be Mass Effect Trilogy, Disco Elysium, and Cyberpunk 2077. They discuss structures of corporate authority, political authority, military authority, things like that.
Yes. If you are not already vaguely familiar with those, I apologize. We're not going to be able to offer too much of a synopsis. We're going to kind of run straight through it.
Yeah. In fact, there's going to be no synopsis. There's going to be no overarching statements. We're going to hone in on some very, very specific points. So you're expecting kind of like a grand scale critique of those games. Unfortunately, this is beyond the scope of this panel. We are particularly interested in honing in on very specific points that those games make and how they relate to other print or visual and audio media. Okay.
I hope everyone is ready for a college lecture at a video game convention.
Yay! Everybody's like, yay, free education. Socialism is the solution. You're welcome.
Right. How many of you are familiar with this book? Ooh, more than I thought. So you know why this is a very salient take.
So for those of you in the back, let me just read the quote to you. They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it, others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why and some do not, but they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest and the kindly weathers of their skies depend wholly on this child's abominable misery.
Who wants to give us a very quick take on what this is about? Who knows? Yes, you. Hand up.
Basically, the greater good sometimes someone has to suffer for it, but it depends on your view of that.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is, how many of you have seen that Doctor Who episode with the space whale? Yeah, this is what that book is about. They ripped that storyline from this book. They kind of wimped out at the end and gave, a good ending. But basically, there's a society that is built entirely on this one child in a basement suffering forever. Being brutalized.
Yeah.
And every single person, when they turn to an adult, finds out. And they can choose to stay or they can choose to leave. Some people stay, some people leave. But that is what this is about.
Person who just raised their hand, let me see. Good.
Yes.
So you touched on a very salient point, it is for the greater good, but it also does not explicitly pass judgment on who really benefits from it. So there is no rhetorical discrepancy either way. Like, if you choose to stay, you're not wrong, but if you choose to leave, you're also not wrong. So there is no inherent judgment that's being passed on this. This just exists, right?
Yes.
So the system of authority is inherently neutral. Like, it's horrible, but it is inherently free of judgment.
Yes, and the individual people are not judged for their choice. There is no right choice in this situation.
Right.
And that is one of the biggest differences between science fiction and fantasy, is that in fantasy there is a good guy and there is a bad guy, and the bad guy is a bad guy because they're a bad guy, right. And the good guy beats the bad guy. In science fiction, the bad guy is an overarching corporation, evil empire system of power, and sometimes you agree with the antagonists.
It is usually a system of authority that is so vast and serpentine that if you were to point to any source of problems with it, it would likely either be so high up as to be virtually unassailable, or so spread out like a hydra that it would be impossible to somehow curtail its authority.
Yes.
And this is actually kind of where these two quotes come into play, as we're going to segue into talking about science fiction. The first is by the former British Paymaster General Lord Babington Macaulay. Logic admits no compromise, but the essence of politics is compromise. And this politics is a political structure and a structure of authority. This leads us into the next quote about science fiction from the sci-fi author Ken MacLeod. Science fiction is the literature of progress, and the political philosophy of progress is essentially liberal. Okay, so when we're talking about liberalism, we're not actually talking about liberalism in the sense of like, woohoo, lefties, communism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no judgment, but like, yeah, sorry. Right, but we'll get to that. Just hold on. But the idea of liberalism in the context of science fiction is best defined by Ian McMillan, and that is political and moral philosophy based on the rights of the individual, liberty, the consent of the governed, political equality, the right to private property, and equality before the law. So basically, no one is special, but everybody has a leg up on everybody else. Right. So it's this idea of kind of laissez-faire government, not just laissez-faire economics, but laissez-faire government. So why is science fiction such a good tool for examining systems of power? The obvious answer is it's fanciful, and it provides us with a perspective that we would previously not consider. But I posit that science fiction acts like a Platonic allegory, in the sense that it presents us with a dark mirror of what we have and gives us options about what could be or what could not be.
Yes, it is so inherently built into the genre of science fiction to be critical of systems of power. And that does not just mean governments. It does not just mean rulers. Think about the very first science fiction novel that ever existed, Frankenstein. It is a critique of what was an epidemic at that time of overly educated men who thought that because they knew a bit of the periodic table, they got to play God.
Lord Byron.
Yeah.
Imagine being Mary Shelley in the 1800s, spending one night with this motherfucker.
And then you create science fiction.
And then
because that man is so hard to deal with.
And then writing Frankenstein about it because Lord Byron was insufferable.
Yeah, so that is an inherent system of power that she dealt with at that time, that created that. And that is so built into the basics of science fiction.
Hashtag not all men except Lord Byron.
Yes.
So the other thing is that science fiction does provide us with a way to self-examine, because while it does not necessarily provide us with a right or wrong answer or the right or correct response to a dilemma, it does force us to think about it and causes us to be like, well, which side of this argument do you want to be on? Do you want to be on this side or on that side? As with Omelas, we frequently find ourselves with a binary choice, and depending on which side of that choice we fall on, this is our self-evaluation. The piece of media that we're studying does not actually judge us. We judge ourselves through this lens.
Yes.
Okay, so Starship Troopers.
How many
Awkward
people
silence.
have heard this thing about how Starship Troopers is like the
Yeah.
most
So-
pro-fascist thing in existence? Yes,
Yeah.
question.
Have you heard, I've heard a take where I've been written Starship Troopers responsible for everything.
I believe it was the other way around. Forever War was 1974, and it was written after the Vietnam War. So
Yeah.
come talk to me later. We will discuss this, because
Yes.
I have a lot of opinions on Forever War, because I really love that book, even though it's like, yeah, it's
Yeah.
like deliberately and very staunchly like conservative right wing, but it doesn't come across that way.
Yes. But yeah,
So-
how many people have heard of Starship Troopers as being this incredibly right-wing, pro-fascist novel? Yeah, that is like one of the biggest takes about this novel.
Yeah.
And it's,
But it's, I mean, somebody actually, a YouTuber by the name, I forget what their handle is, but it's McCullough, in a video described it as like, it's like Atlas Shrugged in space. Shorter. So I will credit this in, I promise I will give this person credit in the bibliography.
Yes.
I do apologize for not having this right now, but their last name is McCullough, and the video is from 2021. If you just look up Starship,
yeah.
I believe
probably.
yes, I am. Do you happen to remember their YouTube profile name?
I think that's just how it goes on.
Okay, cool. So JJ McCullough, right. Okay, very good. So what's interesting to me is I've read Starship Troopers like 4 or 5 times in my life. And the first time I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And then I read it again. I'm like, wait, this is kind of fash. And then I read it again. I'm like, actually, this is kind of cool, the coolest thing ever. And so like, because my opinion kind of vacillated depending on what time in my life I read it, I started really thinking about this novel and being like, okay, well, what is it about Starship Troopers that really forces you to flip back and forth? Same thing with the movie, incidentally. So the critiques of Starship Troopers range from Jeffrey Cass calling it unremittingly grim fascism, to, again, Ken MacLeod calling it the book that covers a range of liberalism's forms, from the democratic to the totalitarian elitist, and it's very heavy on the totalitarian elitist. So how does that manifest itself in the book? Well, there is this quote right here, which I'm not going to read in its entirety, but I will just give you a snippet. This is when Mr. Dubois lectures the class in like the early chapters.
He gets removed in the movie, so if you've only
Yeah.
seen the movie, you have no idea who
Yeah.
this guy
Well,
is.
he's replaced with Michael Ironside's character of Ratchak, and it's just, yeah, okay. We've all seen it. So there is an old song which asserts that the best things in life are free. Not true, utterly false. This was the tragic fallacy that brought the decadence and collapse of the democracies of the 20th century. Those noble experiments failed because the people had been led to believe that they would simply vote for whoever they wanted. That's kind of heavy. And
Everything's
get it
fine.
without toil, without sweat, without tears. So the assertion here is that while technically, yes, true, the best things in life do not cost money, they are still not going to come to you for free. You do need to work for them. You do need to take them, if by force, if necessary. And it's this statement that is issued to Juanito Rico in the beginning of this book that kind of pervades the entirety of the moral philosophy of this text. Like, what is it that you're willing to sacrifice for a better future? And again, this kind of ties us in with Omelas, where you have to make a choice. As a reader, do you have to agree with what Dubois is saying, or do you have to disagree, right? And the book doesn't really provide you with a concrete answer. It does lean into the futility of this forever war, pun intended.
Yes.
There is, but also it does kind of endorse it in a way, right? Because it's very clearly saying like, well, but without this, we would have to fall back on this like lurching automaton that is democracy, and that's gotten nowhere. Okay, do you have anything else to add to that?
Keep
All
going.
right, so next up, do androids dream of electric sheep? Humanity is a manufactured construct. Do you guys remember that blurb at the beginning of the Blade Runner movie where they talk about like how the Nexus 6s are essentially superior to human beings in every aspect? The only thing that they don't have is a capacity for empathy, which has to be measured with this machine, this completely arbitrary construct. And if they are found to have no empathy, it's immediate execution on the spot. Oh, but wait, it's not called execution, it's called retirement, because that sounds friendlier. Oh yeah, also we have to create a special unit of cops called Blade Runners that especially specialize in the extermination of this essentially humans, right? So what that means to us is that humanity is a manufactured construct. Somebody gets to decide who is human and who is not, and it's usually somebody with a badge and a gun.
Yup. Yeah, so they're talking about one of the biggest issues with the test is that they talk about how humans will fail it. It's very much that thing of when you go to the national parks and there's those anti-bear trash cans. There is an overlap between the smartest bear and the dumbest human.
Yeah.
There is an overlap between the most empathetic android and the least empathetic human.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where's the line?
And one of the interesting things about this, and this is something that I kind of only realized in hindsight, is that this book was written in 1968, which roughly coincides with the peak of the civil rights movement. I mean, I'm not saying that, the Martin Luther King assassination, which happened in April of 1968, was in any way, shape, or form influential in this. I mean, P.K. Dick was writing this book for years before that even happened. But you have to understand that there is a very clear through line with all of these science fiction authors being extremely libertarian in their leanings, because they seek individual freedom from all these systems of oppression, whether it's with Heinlein and government and democracy and the oppressive machinery of like the political machinations behind them, with P.K. Dick, with environmental destruction and like free love and drug use, or any number of others, including Asimov, who literally just wanted to bang everybody and then wrote really, really awkward sex scenes about it in his books. No, it's horrendous. Read Foundation and you need a shower. But the point is that a lot of these themes are very clearly presented through this writing. And here are some quotes. I do like both of these because they essentially summarize everything that the core message of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. The Leningrad psychiatrist Bryant broke in brusquely, think that a small class of human beings could not pass the Voight-Kampff scale. If you tested them in line with police work, you'd assess them as humanoid robots. You'd be wrong, but by then they'd be dead. So this presents us with an interesting examination of the authority of the police force in the world of Blade Runner, right? Like, yeah, you're given the authority to shoot on sight, and if you are presented with a threat, you're going to do that. But in hindsight, what if you make the wrong choice, right? It's that line from the movie that summarizes, have you ever retired a human by mistake? And Deckard says no, and Rachel says, in your position, that is a risk, right?
Yeah.
And then the second quote is, the issue is not the legality of bone marrow analysis, but the issue is that your empathy delineation test failed in response to my niece. So you are, as a human, a product of your environment. It's this whole debate that was going on around that time of nature versus nurture. And one of the big things that's incorporated into the conversation about the nature of humanity is, where do your memories come from? How did your identity form? And remember, a lot of androids do have their memories implanted, but in Rachel's case, she is a synthetic, but she was born on an off-world colony ship. So her company was like these 14 adult dudes that essentially took care of her. And that's how she understood everything about Earth. That's how she understood everything about like support networks and empathy. So her understanding of human empathy would be completely different from ours, right?
Yep, so it becomes, completely nailed it.
All right, good. Just a very couple of quick notes on other media because I don't want to leave it out. Like in music, obviously, there's not a lot of sci-fi music, but there is some. One of them about undermining structures of authority is David Bowie's Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, in which this whole idea of the control of the gender binary is very frequently called into question because nobody in that album is gay or straight or male or female. They're all just kind of there. And the entirety of the premise of this album is essentially about deconstructing that idea. And then Billy Idol's Cyberpunk is about the domination of the music industry in the 1980s by corporations who were like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if computers made music? And Billy Idol was like, disagree.
Hard no.
Yeah. And in film, obviously, Alien is a prime example of how you undermine systems of authority, is that the villain, I mean, I know that it's in the title and I know that it seems very logical, but like the alien's not the villain.
Not even close.
The alien is just like this force of nature that they have to deal with. The villain is the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, right?
Who's sending people out to die.
Yeah. And we did have this kind of mini debate about this earlier, Star Wars. And I don't mean necessarily like the 4 through 6 episodes, but I mean like all the other ancillary stuff, like the prequels and also the Disney shows, because they kind of reframe a lot of those ideas.
Yes, because if you watch just the original trilogy, it is not a sci-fi movie series. It is a fantasy. It is a fantasy set in space. There is a good guy. There is a bad guy. The bad guy is a bad guy because you're told he's a bad guy. The good guy does good guy things and wins at the end. The bad guy dies. You don't get this morally gray question. You are not put in this position of like, what side do I choose? The narrative tells you there is good and there is bad. Very clearly, but then you get into the prequel trilogies,
right,
and
where
you get into the
there's
shows.
a lot more morally gray. I mean, like George Lucas wrote it kind of awkwardly, but the idea of surrendering democracy in favor of a dictatorship, again,
everything's fine.
and
That
willingly,
gives-
willingly too. That's the thing. Remember that line? This is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause.
Yeah. So yeah, we can talk, and like even in some of the, you said it was in the Andor TV show,
Yeah,
where
and Rogue One.
Rogue One, where the one guy just ganks a
He
dude
just,
in
like,
an alley.
86 is this dude in an alley because, like, no, I'm afraid you might talk to the stormtroopers. Bam!
Yeah, how people absolutely sell out anyone who has force powers
Yeah.
or the Jedi to the Empire because they are so scared of what the Empire is going to do to them.
Right. Yeah.
You took it from space
I mean,
fantasy to science
Yeah,
fiction
the
real
very,
fast.
the very presence of an empire. I mean, like, just name any piece of media in which the empire are the good guys. Like, unquestionably morally good.
Yeah.
Right?
But
Like,
then we can talk about, the Empire is the bad guys, but the individual people within it are often so nuanced, and you are given reasons to root for them as to why they are working within the Empire. Because there's that one novel series about I will always forget his name, it's the blue guy that everyone loves. Yep, him. Everyone loves him. He is categorically a villain, but everyone loves him because he is a nuanced and interesting character. That is science fiction.
which guy is this?
Drawn.
Oh, Tron. Okay. got
Drawn.
it.
Anyway,
All right. Yeah.
question.
Oh. Oh, well.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
All right.
again, like we do have to accept that writers are, again, a product of their environment.
Yes.
So that actually
art
makes
imitates
sense.
life, life imitates art.
Sure.
Back and forth all the time.
All right. And at long last, after 20 minutes of this,
Why? Why video games?
why video games?
We just gave you a whole lecture on books and media. Why video games? So one of the big things is that movies, music, TV shows, books, they will always involve the audience only as a passive observer. You are never actively involved in the narrative if you are reading, if you are watching. You can make those decisions for yourself. You can imagine yourself in those situations. You can go to yourself, well, this is what I would do, but you're not doing it. You are only thinking of it and like arguing with other people about it. Video games makes you an active participant in everything you are dealing with. When you talk about agency and choice, video games force you to make those choices and give you that agency. They take you from a passive observer to an active participant, which makes it much easier to show people complex things and complex ideas because you are working through them and living through them, not listening to someone talk at you for 4 hours about what 2 words mean.
They also do create this very easy and frequently binary way of interacting with those choices. But regardless, they do leave that choice in your hands. And to some extent, you are allowed and, in fact, required to shape the world around you with those choices and decisions you're making. So the freedom of choice is presented vis-a-vis how we treat those systems of power. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree with them? Vote with your actions.
Yes.
So,
And one of the things that sci-fi video games do particularly that we will talk about a lot is that we've all played fantasy RPGs where there are good choices and bad choices. There are good endings and bad endings, and it is canon, and I don't care how much you fight about it, we all know the good endings and the bad endings. In a lot of sci-fi games, there are no good endings or bad endings. There are no good choices or bad choices. There are just choices that may shape the world, may not, but you are not judged by the narrative for your choices.
So this brings us to Mass Effect, which, I love all 3 of those games. Only 3 of them.
Yes, there are only 3. There are only 3.
Thank you. I'm so
Andromeda
glad.
is
I'm
a
so
star
glad you're here to
system.
endorse my shit talking about Andromeda.
Andromeda is a star system. It's not canon. Yeah, question?
I think
Mea
most of
culpa.
us did. I think most of us would rather forget.
Mea culpa.
But one of the things that's really interesting to me about Mass Effect is how it very deliberately sets you outside of the system,
Yes.
but also makes you utterly and completely beholden to that system. Because think about it. The very first thing that happens, like almost immediately out of the gate, like there is a whole bunch of stuff that happens before the events of Mass Effect 1, but basically all those things.
You show up,
You're a
you are
Spectre.
in charge of the controller.
Yeah. I mean, like, it doesn't happen, like, immediately. I think it's about 3 to 4 hours in, but considering this is a 30-hour game, that's actually fairly quickly. It happens in the first 10% of the game. And you become a Spectre. Like, to some extent, it's a little narratively forced, but we're going to let that slide because that's not the important thing. The important thing is what the Spectre is and what it represents, right? And this is Dr. Chakwa's calling them. Spectres don't have any official power. Basically, they're a shadow organization with a mandate to preserve galactic stability. So let's unpack that statement for a second. They don't have any official power, meaning they're not connected to any one specific system of authority, but they do still answer to the, not the Alliance, they do answer to the, oh God, what is the? Council,
Yeah.
thank you, yeah, words are hard.
We were not English majors.
But look at the wording of this. They're a shadow organization. That has a number of very dicey connotations to it, especially when you combine it with the next part of the sentence, with a mandate to preserve galactic stability. What the fuck does that mean? Like,
It means nothing. That means nothing.
it means nothing,
That
right?
is a
But
sentence.
no, it means nothing, but it also means everything, because it basically means you are in control of every choice you make. And every choice you make is somehow relevant to this process of preserving the status quo or somehow elevating the status quo of the galaxy. So what the function of Spectres is in this case is to present themselves as a kind of a fulcrum point for the different sides. And before we get into this, like, I would love to get into the politics of Mass Effect because there's a lot to talk about, but we don't have 4 hours.
No, that is like a multiple. Like you could have an entire YouTube channel devoted to like 4-hour video essays about the politics of Mass Effect.
Just to summarize it for you, there are elements of genocide. There are elements of genetic. What's that word for it? Right, the sterilization.
Gene editing,
yeah.
genetic.
Yeah, exactly. So
Cloning.
eugenics.
Yeah.
And there is also this question of landless states, like with the Quarian flotilla. And that's a very close analog to what's going on.
Religion,
Yeah.
just bureaucracy
Yeah.
in general, the dangers of red tape,
Yeah.
whole nine, like techno-fascism.
Yeah. So whenever you're dealing with any issue as Shepard, you are always presented like as this balancing rod that's intended to negotiate the balance between these two powers. Like, because remember, when Sovereign shows up, like this big fuck off space bug shows up on your planet, your first reaction should be, okay, let's get together every damn ship we have and fire our cannons until this thing until it's a giant big blotch in the sky. What do? Well, I don't know.
Is it really a
Is it
threat?
really, like, is it
it
though?
really?
Yeah. So they hem and they haw and they send you on bullshit errands. All the while, this thing is out there and they know that this thing is deadly and they do nothing about it. They put the power to do something about it squarely in your hands.
Yeah. So this is one of the things we want to talk about is because we've just talked a whole lot about how systems of authority become the bad guys in this game. When you are a Spectre, it's particularly in video games, it is a power fantasy inherently in the game design. Particularly in a game where you have laser guns, it's a power fantasy. So how do you create a power fantasy without inherently critiquing your player, right? If you want to critique systems of government in this, your player is the most powerful piece on the board. So how do you critique them without that? One, you put them outside of the people making these decisions. You are trying to get the decisions made, you are outside of those decisions. Second, we have some great things where the narrative does not judge your choices. And I think that Mass Effect does this incredibly well, because I am a big Dragon Age fan. I love BioWare's Dragon Age games. You could not do the Paragon Renegade system in Dragon Age. It does not work. It is exclusive to a sci-fi medium.
Because technically neither one of those things is good or bad. They're just kind of different ways of approaching this. And BioWare kind of did this already with Jade Empire. With the closed fist or open palm style, but like this was clearly the precursor to Mass Effect. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, so they talk about like, you are the most powerful piece on the board, so how do we keep from critiquing you? Well, we give you choices that are not going to, that are, one, morally gray, like we've talked about, that two, yes, they just determine the end of the world, or like the end of the universe, technically, but none of them are good or bad. All of the choices you make are not good choices or bad choices, and the narrative never judges you for it. The narrative hard judges the council and other systems of government hard.
Yep.
No one likes the council for obvious reasons. The narrative
It's
is
a
telling
bureaucracy.
you how bad they are. But you can be an asshole. Have you ever done a full renegade run? You're a dick.
Yeah.
And no one calls you on it.
No, your companions are like, nah, this is fine. Like, I mean, whatever.
Like, the system, the game, no one ever is like, hey, you're a horrible person.
Notice that like when you have that standoff with Rex in about the second act of Mass Effect, you have your let's say you get your Paragon and Renegade options high enough by that point when both are equivalent, right? The options to shoot him is neither of those options, right? You can either tell him to fall in line and just get your shit together, or you can talk him down like in a very civil way, but neither one of those will result in you pulling a gun and shooting him.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, it's such an interesting binary because in a classic RPG, if you're going to be a dick, you're going to stab them, right? But in Mass Effect, if you're going to be a dick, it's just like you're just a hard ass commander.
Yeah.
Right.
Whereas BioWare will do this. This is not a BioWare thing. This is a Sci-Fi thing because in Dragon Age Inquisition, my favorite game, if you're an asshole, they call you an asshole and they leave.
Yep.
Your friends call you out on your bullshit constantly.
No,
that does not happen in this game. And
you can get your companions killed if you don't do their loyalty missions, but that's on you.
Yeah.
Again, that is your prerogative.
So you are outside that. You are the most powerful being on the board, but the decisions you're making and the way the game is handling your decisions is not judging you in the way that it judges the system of power in the game. Which is also absolutely shown in that your combat, what you do in combat, has no effect on the story. It just, did you win the fight? Yeah, but you don't get Renegade or Paragon points for how you handle a combat. Mm-hmm. When you're shooting people, it does not matter.
Nah, it's just whatever. All right, moving on.
Disco Elysium.
My favorite game ever.
This is all you, baby boy.
Depression, capitalism, and a hideous tie. I heard Disco Elysium described as like, this is what happens when you give a bunch of like post-Soviet depressed Estonians access to Dungeons and Dragons. And I mean, truthfully, again, when we're going to talk about Disco Elysium, it would require multiple hours to talk about the geopolitics and the geography and just the ecology of the world of Disco Elysium. It is so incredibly complex and nuanced, partially because it is a fully original world written by Robert Kurwitz, but also it's so inherently mystified for you by the game, and it's doled out for you in these like tiny Dark Souls-sized droplets of information, and I repeat, only if you go looking for them, because the game already assumes that you, as a resident of this world, kind of presumably know about it, which is like one of the reasons that, just as an aside, I highly recommend if you've only played Disco Elysium once, you need to play it like twice or more. It's like a good jazz album, like you're not going to get everything on the first go. But the point is that one of the things that Disco Elysium does is it presents you as an agent of one of the systems of power and authority in this world. You're a cop.
Yeah.
Harrier Dubois, second Lieutenant Euphrator, Harrier Dubois is a cop.
Yes.
And he's apparently very good at his job. So, no, seriously, like there is a segment in the game where Kim is like, so you were really good at this.
What happened?
Yeah. Dude.
Yeah. So for vague context, there was a revolution. There is a militia that is
So basically, in
semi-legal.
order to prevent a revolution from happening again, the RCM gets formed. And we're going to talk about the RCM in just a second. But what I think is really interesting is that the game puts you in the position of power and authority, right? I mean, it makes you a cop, right? Think about like...
You are a part of the power of the system of power. You are not a cog in the machine. You are not separated from it. You are a part of it. You are an active member in it.
But at the same time, it fully disempowers you in two ways. One is it renders you an amnesiac.
You can't remember anything.
Right. So, and the second thing is that regardless of how you approach the problem, it's going to get resolved. So there is the inexorable passage of time working against you. Remember, the game takes place across 5 days. There's a clock that's ticking down. And I've never done this myself, but if anybody has tried this, where you just dick around the entire time and don't actually approach the murder and the case in any way, is it possible to like still finish the game if you don't do anything? Do you guys know? Anybody played it? No. Okay. Cool.
I mean, I would
That's fine.
assume that it would just happen
Yeah.
that regardless of what happens,
Yeah.
the tribunal is showing up.
Right.
Even if you solve the murder, even
Right.
if you do everything right, the tribunal's showing up.
Yeah.
Someone's getting shot.
Right. So.
You cannot change who did the murder. You
Right.
cannot change how you find out about the murder.
Right. And
You can change so much in this game, but
And-
not the base pieces.
And to just to even point it out further, the murder itself is not even that relevant to the case you're trying to solve, right? Because it kind of happens outside of everything that's going on. It's just kind of a blip on the radar. Like, you just get sent in by your precinct, and Kim's around, and you guys are trying to do this thing, and meanwhile you're on this like red herring chase. But the most interesting thing that's happening around you is all of the environmental stuff, like all the stuff that's going on with the Wild Pines Collective, all the stuff that's going on with the Débardeur, all the stuff that's happening with the Trade Collective, and all of those things. So let's talk about the RCM for just a second, because this is actually kind of an interesting thing. Is the slogan of the RCM is Justice, Union, Prudence, and Force. But that's a new one. Does anybody remember what the original one is? Afterlife, death. After death, life again. After the world, the pale. After the pale, the world again. Anybody know where that comes from? So that is the DeLorean. That is a DeLorean prayer of meditation, and Dolores Day being like the closest thing this world has to a deity, essentially implies that the RCM and all of the police forces are somehow inherently tied into this religious system that has been since kind of outmoded and overthrown. So your presence in this world, by virtue of you being a cop and connected to this outdated religion, is essentially it's a bygone age, right? And the game does make an attempt to tell you exactly what the RCM does, like in those entries from the encyclopedia, like the Revachol Citizens Militias, the police force you and him are part of. It's a self-organized Peace Corps of the occupied city of Revachol. Unpack that for me, please. It's a Peace Corps in the occupied city of Revachol. Why the hell would you need a Peace Corps in an occupied city, right? There you go. Exactly. It was a rhetorical
How
question, but I'm
very
glad you provided an answer.
Rome never waged war. They preemptively defended themselves. You think I'm joking.
Roman peace. War is just Roman peace.
Yep.
That's fine. And then Kim tells you that the RCM was formed by the coalition government to restore order in the international zone after the revolution. So we did. Now we attempt to maintain that order, no more, no less. For perhaps it is better to say that we are allowed to form. It is a point of contention whether the citizens of Revachol or the coalition government founded the RCM. Okay. So how does the game end? So on the morning of day 5, there's a tribunal. You know, depending on how well you do, several people might get shot, or no one gets shot, or you just talk your way through it, and it's fine. So you come to, the murder is still not solved. And then Kim goes like, hey, we've looked everywhere. Like, the only place we haven't looked is that island over there. And there seems to be a bunker there with a direct sight line to the hotel that's right there. Why don't we go check it out, right? So like,
That would have been really good detective work.
yeah,
Day 2.
Yeah, that really would have been great. So you go there, and who do you find there? You find this old dude with a rifle who's just sitting there, and he's completely zonked out of his mind. And his entire thesis is like, I'm an old soldier, and I was here since the days of the revolution, and in this woman, Klasia, I saw beauty, I saw purity, and then she ended up fucking this one enemy of the revolution, and I was like, I felt betrayed, and I wanted to kill both of them, and I shot him, but I couldn't bring myself to kill her. So,
we are looking at the guy who committed the murder is so completely brain rotted from the propaganda and the horrors that he witnessed during a war.
perpetrated by the system of authority, no less.
Yeah. That
Yeah, he's basically just, you know, like there's nothing left, and this is yet another way. Like you're basically expected to take him in, but like he is a husk of a man, right? He in no way is the culprit. The culprit is the system, and you're part of the system, and you're expected to do this. And so, despite the fact that all of this stuff happens on your watch, like the game kind of absolves you of it. It's just like, these things happen.
And what's interesting is that the mechanics of the game are wildly customizable. You can set this game so that you do not have the same experience 5, 10, 15, 20 times you play this game,
Yeah.
the mechanics of the game will be different. You have so many different skills and options and things that you can build your specialty into and ignore, but the storyline will always stay the same.
Exactly.
You will never find it early enough. You will
Yeah.
never, even if you know you will never figure it out ahead of time.
Time marches ever on.
So
in this
you
game.
are a part of the system of power, but you are inherently powerless to change the outcome of this. And that is how we can, another example of working with, making a powerful piece on the board, not be critiqued.
high tech, low life, bisexual
Yes.
lighting.
It's our game room.
Welcome
at
to
home.
Cyberpunk 2077. All right, so
That was a downer. It's gonna get worse.
I have consistently shat on Cyberpunk 2077 when it first came out, and now that I've gone back and played it again, I'm like, I truly owe this game a huge apology.
To be fair, it was a mess when it first came out. It was
Right.
not ready.
Now, it's still not a good game, but the way it creates a world for you to interact with is remarkable. And in many ways, I would like to mirror the sentiments of Hello Future Me and say that this game is much better than you think it is. Because the writing, like, regardless of what you think of the gameplay, regardless of how you want to interact with it, whether you spend most of your time in photo mode, the game itself, the writing in the game itself is extremely cyberpunk. It checks all of the boxes and does so very well. So for starters, the system of control in Cyberpunk is the corporations. It's Arasaka, it's Militech.
There isn't even a government mentioned.
You know, they mention a mayor of Night City, but like he's just kind of there. There's not like, you know, the problem is that
There's
the
no
government.
president. There's no military. It's all
Everything's
corporate.
corporate, right? So you want your fire put out, you call a corpor. You want medical aid, well, you know, that's why you have the trauma team, right? You want literally anything purchased, congratulations, you're in the right place. For the right money, you can have it. In fact, you can walk into the jankiest, most disgusting sex shop, get yourself a bad dragon dildo that's about this big, and like no one is going to judge you for it so long as you pay for it.
Yep. You can do literally anything you want so long as you pay for it or it benefits a corporation.
Yeah, like-
you can go on a killing spree, and as long as you pay the fine, no one cares.
Yeah. You can even do gigs for the cops. That's a thing.
Yeah.
Right? Just like, hey, I am a rebel in Night City. Oh, by the way, do you guys need any crimes solved? So, and this is where I'm going with the revolution will be televised. Everything about this game is under corporate control, which is exactly what Cyberpunk is. Cyberpunk is unrelenting in reminding you that you are just a cog in a very vast, deadly machine. It's like the Moloch apparatus from Metropolis.
And you can get ungodly powerful in this city. You can have more money than some of the
Yeah.
corporations if you work hard enough. You can have the most insane tech. You can have the best guns. You can be the most like richest, most powerful person in the city.
And you still cannot affect any real change.
Yeah.
Just think about it. There is a reason the plot of Cyberpunk is so unrelentingly linear. It's because it wants to remind you every step of the way that whatever you do as a player in this game, you do not have control over the way this world is shaped. You are far too small and insignificant. And like, yeah, the characters will remind you, like, do you want to live a quiet life and go out in a blaze of glory? But like, ultimately, what does a blaze of glory mean in the context of Night City? Like, sorry? That's true. But like, you can't, I mean, Johnny Silverhand is the one that comes the closest, right? Think about it. He nukes the Arasaka building. Oh yeah, that's right. But the point is that like, ultimately, none of this change is in any way effective. Like, it doesn't do anything. Arasaka is still in charge. Militech is still in charge. Like, all these corporations, they're still present there. So, no matter what you do, the corporate overlords win.
Yep. Yeah, because what are the different endings you can get? Because you can affect the ending. You can, like Mass Effect, you can have different endings. But what are they?
Yeah. Well, I think there's like 6 of them, and I don't remember because I haven't played through all of them. But in 3 of them, you're basically like an Arasaka stooge, right? You end up being like either one of their corporates, like test subjects, or you end up being a killer, or you end up being like in their service. 2 of them mean you just go back to Earth and live out your days for the remaining, 6 weeks that you have. And then the last one is you let Johnny completely take over your body, right? None of those are technically good. right? In none of them do you like go and you just like nuke Arasaka and you like liberate like, you know, Alt Cunningham from her bondage of being an AI, and then Johnny and her get to like ride off into the sunset and you end up smooching Panam or whatever. Actually, it's Judy Alvarez for me, but like it's fine, whatever. Judy is obviously the superior choice.
No one gets to ride off into the sunset
Right.
with their hot techno babe.
Cyberpunk girlfriend, right? Yeah.
I was trying to be gender neutral
Yeah.
with it, but yeah. No, you don't get the happy ending.
Sure.
It doesn't exist. No matter how much money you accrue, and you can be, I cannot overstate how ungodly wealthy you can be in this game if you try hard enough.
Yeah, and the fact is that all of your money is basically made through gigs. Like all of it is through fixers. Like none of it is done like on any kind of regular basis. Like somebody just calls you like, hey, do you want a job? Like, sweet.
Yeah. So
Right.
no matter what you do, no matter how much power you amass, you are still at your core a cog in the machine.
Right.
So all of this discussion of like, I mean, and we can talk about how the corporations in Cyberpunk are not shown as good people. I mean, Arasaka's the mob.
It's
Come
Yakuza. It's
on.
essentially Yakuza. Like the way the corporate
And
structure is
they're not
arranged.
even doing like the cool mob movies from history. It's the evil mob.
Yeah,
it's
it's-
the bad mob that cuts off your finger for looking at them wrong.
Yeah, I would posit that it's not so much the evil mob, it's more like the uncaring mob.
Yeah,
Like they're just
it's-
like you are a bug on the windshield. Like
So-
be more be more aerodynamic next time, I guess. Like
So, like Mass Effect, you can choose endings. Your choices do matter. But like Disco Elysium, do they really?
I mean, they don't really matter, right? They're still all flavors of shit, right?
Yes.
So, and that brings us to the wrap up for this. So, what does it all add up to? Like, how does science fiction judge systems of power, and how does that translate into video games? Do they handle it correctly?
I don't. That's not a yes or no question. How dare you?
Oh, I was just asking you to expand on that. Good grief.
The unfortunate truth is that for a lot of science fiction, there is no yes or no answer. It is intended to be morally gray, nuanced. You are intended to have to think about these things. If you've ever played Spelljammer in D&D, if you've ever like looked at the Spelljammer modules, they do an incredible job of setting up morally gray, weird situations that there is no right answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The thing that I keep coming back to, particularly with BioWare games, is that everybody criticizes them for only giving you like a binary choice, right? The binary choice of either being the goodest good boy ever or like, you know, killing kittens.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that, because I think that the choices, when they stack up on a timeline, they are far more nuanced, because it's very difficult. Like I remember one time I was playing through Knights of the Old Republic, and it's that thing where you have to like go down into the sea on Kolto, and there's like this giant space lizard that lives down there that produces that the healing whatever thing that they make, and in order to progress, you can kill it. And I was so sure that this was the right call, and I did it. And I come back to the surface, and they're yelling at me for cutting off their Kolto supply, like they're gonna die out now. I'm like,
Yeah.
So I'll see you guys later.
Yeah.
I'm never
So-
coming back here again.
Some of the examples we've given are about, you know, critiquing systems of power rather than the individual player, and how we can separate the individual player from the systems of power in order to show the systems of power in a negative light without telling the player they're being an asshole. We've talked about it with setting you outside of the system of power. We've talked about it where you are part of the system of power but functionally cannot actually make change. And then we've talked about where you can affect change, but the system of power is so labyrinthianly huge it won't matter.
Yeah, so we should definitely mention a few other pieces of media
That is not the
tackle these
only
ideas.
ways. Those are just the three that we
So
found.
recently, the lead developer of Helldivers 2 found himself in hot water by tweeting something to the effect of like, "Oh, you know, keep politics out of games. Just make good games, bro."
The maker of Helldivers, Starship Troopers, Electric Boogaloo, said, "Why are we putting politics in games?
Yeah.
It's 2025.
I am
Everything
certain.
is
now,
not fine."
Now, I am certain this man is trolling, because there's no way he could be that short-sighted and
Yeah.
actually say something that dumb. But if I am mistaken, if he is that short-sighted and he did say something that dumb, I sincerely apologize to him with all my heart. You know, live your best life.
Yeah.
But Helldivers is fascinating for that exact reason, right? Because it kind of echoes a lot of those same systems of control and power, except, you know, you are effectively an agent of that
You
system.
are a cog in the machine, and democracy thanks you for your sacrifice. It doesn't matter how many big guns you get. It doesn't matter how many tanks you get. It doesn't matter how many airstrikes you call in. I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah.
We didn't make those robots. We promise.
We definitely did not release those bugs.
We appreciate your sacrifice, soldier.
There is no such thing as flying bugs, and if you do see flying bugs, then that's not our fault.
Yeah.
Dead Space is yet another example that's fantastic because it combines the evils of vast government structures with the let's be real, it's Scientology. It's called Unitology, but like really they're dealing with Scientology. Like the whole thing is basically just an alien redux where like, you don't mess with the thing, and they're like, we're gonna mess with the thing. It's like, cool, now you're all necromorphs.
Yeah.
Have fun.
So, yeah.
Hard Space Shipbreaker is yet another example because that's essentially like being a cog in a corporate machine that definitely does not care if you live or die. One wrong move can cause the whole thing to collapse. There's no safety networks, whatever. But you can still have fun doing it. So there's a Lethal Company, I think that I haven't played Lethal Company yet, but it sounds fascinating because you're literally just dropped on these like worlds and you're like, mine minerals, except there's also these unspeakable horrors
Yes.
here, but don't pay attention to those, that's fine.
So, what I would ask is if you were going to go play more sci-fi games, to have that thought while you're playing with it is like, what is the system of power that is being critiqued, and how am I outside of it? Because one of the things that we always come to with these panels is, why are we talking about this? Why did you waste an hour-ish of your day that you could be day drinking or playing video games to come listen to us be nerds about this,
Don't
right?
remind me.
And because when you interact with games on this level, when you have that thought of like, what are the systems of power? What is the game saying is good? What is the game saying is bad? That is media literacy. That is media analysis. So if we can talk about
Yeah, we're big on media literacy.
yeah,
here.
we're really big on this. So if you can have just those little bits of thoughts while you're playing those games, that is engaging with media analysis. And the more you do it, the better you will get at it. So when you start with the big things, that's as simple as, who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? Is it me? Am I a bad guy? I don't know. You can get down into the very subtle, nuanced, cerebral things the games are trying to tell you. You start at the top, you work your way down. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so we have about 12 minutes for questions. You are welcome to start filing out.
Yeah.
If you want a question, come
on
up
up.
here. We will have a microphone. Oh no, use that. There's this one here. You use that one so you can answer.
Sounds good. That one work?
Yes.
So I do understand this is a video game thing. I do have one book recommendation.
Okay.
The Ship Who Sung franchise from
Okay.
Anna McCaffrey.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Minorities being used for the greater good. And it's
Yeah.
got that, what makes a human. But on terms of games, the Thief franchise
Yes.
does
Love it.
explore, the Thief franchise does explore, like you as an outsider looking in on the ills of society, but you are objectively the bad guy here.
Yeah.
But you also live there.
Yeah.
So it's a.
So you have to work within a particular framework, which is a big thing in a
Yeah.
lot of games like that. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned Thief. Immersive sims generally do tend to do that. Like if you look at the variety of them, like Prey or Deus Ex or Ultima games, they all kind of play on that trope. And I think that that's a byproduct of the game design. All right. Anybody else
All
have any
right.
questions? Yes, come on up.
Assuming
come
you
on
have
up.
questions because
Yeah.
you're standing here.
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
Yeah,
You're
don't be
fine.
shy.
Most of the people
fine.
are gone.
Yeah, just come on up and ask your stuff.
Yes.
Do you want to speak more to the Forever War, or maybe
I do want to
after?
speak more to the Forever War. So
Okay, be quick. But
So
go.
yeah.
Go.
So Joe Haldeman, like the thing that always sticks out at me is like when they come back to Earth and everybody's suddenly non-binary and queer, and it's very clearly framed as like a bad thing. And I keep reading that part, and I'm like, wait, that actually sounds kind of dope. But yeah, it's an interesting dichotomy because it's very clearly talking about like this idea that equipment and weapons evolve faster than the people who are firing them, which is like, you know, this idea of future shock, which is explored across a lot of media. But the individual person like stops being responsible for that act. Like, and in fact, like the way humanity evolves is so rapid, considering the time dilation situation, that by the end of that book, like all humans, like humans like us, are essentially posited as outside of society. So like all the veterans are just no longer viable, really. So it's just kind of an interesting perspective from somebody who's very hard right-leaning in like to have such a liberal, like, and I mean like leftist liberal take on the situation.
I could talk to you later, but for food for thought, it's also interesting how Heinlein is often very misogynist, and then also like parts of Starship. I forget, like also very like progressive in other ways when it comes to women.
Yeah,
He's
I mean,
powerful
Heinlein-
women. I'll stop talking because
No,
I.
you're good. No,
you're
I have a
good.
thing
Yeah.
about this.
Catch
Heinlein is
me
a
after
genuinely
the
fascinating author
Q&A.
because everyone thinks he's just Starship Troopers. Has anyone here read Stranger in a Strange Land? Yeah. I mean, have any of you
So
even
much
just seen
alien
the overly
sex.
sarcastic productions video about Stranger in a Strange Land? Yes. It's so good.
So much
Everyone
alien
talking
sex.
about how Heinlein is like a hardcore fascist needs to read that other book because he is not. And we need to consider the context of his
He's
other
just
works in order to interpret one. That
He's
is
just a-
really important.
He's just a pervy old man. Let him vibe.
Look, Heinlein wants weird shit. I don't want a world that Heinlein created because I have body parts that he was not a fan of and wanted to do weird things to. But God, he is so much more than just shoot bugs fascist guy.
All right, come on up.
Yes, there's the microphone. If you're going to be at our panel on Sunday, I have a badge flag for you because we have ones that say A+ panel attendee. I just forgot them.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
All right, sounds good.
I would also ask your thoughts on the Expanse series, the novel specifically.
That is a you
I've
question.
seen it. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's
or
fine.
read
The,
it. But go ahead and tell me.
I would recommend the novels over the show because that's
Is that the show
usually-
with Seth MacFarlane on the like?
No.
No, that's a
You're
different
thinking
one.
of
No,
Orville.
I'm thinking of the Orville.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. The main character, it spans a lot of time. The main character jumps between being a lot of those positions, the cog in the machine versus outside of the machine versus in the system but separate from it. So I think you would like analyzing it. Maybe like it. I'm not sure.
Hell yeah.
Also, the game Mouthwashing.
Yeah, I just picked that up.
Not familiar.
It's more of a visual novel, so there's very little character choice, but it does very much exist in the same realm of like, you're in space because of a company, you're suffering.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
employee.
Yeah.
So
Thank you for your service.
Exactly. So two things I think you would both
Absolutely.
really
Thank
dig
you.
your teeth into.
Also, if you'll be at our panel on Sunday, I have a badge flag for you.
Okay.
So it's
Please
great.
come back.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, come on up.
Hello. I love your vest.
I'm wearing a vest.
It's a jacket.
I thought it was.
It's a
Oh,
vest
I thought
jacket.
that
It's a
was separate
vacket.
sleeves.
For like a hot second, I was like, what am I?
I thought that was set. No. Oh, that's cool. That's a cool jacket.
Thank you. I like your jacket too.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. I actually have a game recommendation, and then I'll go to my
Yes.
question. You should definitely try Iron Lung.
I've
Iron
played
Lung. Okay.
Played Iron Lung. Yeah, it's brilliant.
I'm going to be honest. If there's an obscure video game, he's probably played it. If you guys have seen the show, Actually, every time they have obscure video game questions, he knows the answers.
Cool.
Don't at me. I had a lot of free time in my 20s.
It's okay to have free time in your 20s. The question was, so Sci-Fi teaches us that power is like something we don't technically have. There's an illusion of it.
Yeah.
So, what are games that sort of move us towards anarchy or resistance? And how can we sort of emulate that in our own lives, if possible?
Deus Ex.
Oh, yeah. You're a big Deus Ex fanboy.
I mean, one of the endings is you can literally pull the plug on everything electronic. And I'm talking about the original Deus Ex from 2000.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wild. Yeah. But the first Deus Ex absolutely is like, fuck the government.
Got it.
Yeah. That is a really good question. Thank you. If you'll be at our panel, I have a badge for you.
Dope.
Badge flag.
The question was like, what games force you to lean hard anarchist
Thank you.
with their choices? Deus Ex was the one.
Yeah. All right, we have 5 minutes left,
Yeah.
so quick
Please
questions.
come on up. Come on up.
Instead of making you walk all the way over there, we'll hand the microwave that way. Microwave microphone. Words.
First of all, thank you for such a great panel.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
I was wondering if you have any thoughts or recommendations of video games that have a more utopian or hopeful portrayal of future.
Okay, so video games that have a more hopeful or utopian portrayal of the future. That's going to be really difficult to find because video games are so inherently, like, especially in sci-fi, you are going and shooting things, you are killing things, and so there's always going to be a problem that needs to be solved. Very few video games ever have like this, everything's great going on or like a more utopian. You can talk a little bit about how like the Citadel in Mass Effect is meant to be kind of a utopian thing. It's very Babylon 5
Yeah.
for anyone who knows and loves that TV show. Yeah. But yeah, like unfortunately in video games in particular, because you have to go in and do things and you need your players to go complete missions and do things,
Right.
there are problems they have to solve which means utopia isn't really possible in a video game situation, unfortunately. I wish it was. That's a
I would
really good
actually
question.
say Civilization. The Civilization series, generally
that's a good
speaking,
point. I was wrong.
So it's not a given, but it is an option, because you can build your civilization to like have all of these scientific and cultural and
You're so
artistic.
smart.
I'm not. It's just I just play a lot of games, dude. That is not smart. If anything, it is the opposite of that. But yeah, so Civilization.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next
It's a great
person.
question. Come on up.
Let's start packing
Yeah.
more stuff.
Nope.
Sorry.
Okay.
Never mind.
So, one of the big things that I hear talked about online a lot is the moving beyond so we're just noting what the problem is, and so moving on to what the next step is.
Right.
So, would you say it's actually a problem with any of these games that they present you with a situation where you can be very powerful, but you can't actually change things, but they don't actually suggest, here's what you would do if you wanted to actually change things? Going beyond, is it actually a criticism? I would argue it's actually a criticism of the game that it puts you in this situation in the first place.
I think.
But I take your point in that, well, if you're going to criticize first, you got to think about it.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
I would agree with that for right now. If we're talking about games from the past, because that is a very of this time take. Sci-fi is so inherently of the time that it is from. It is so locked into the, I would say, 5 to 10 years in which it was created, in the context leading up to it. So I think that is a really good critique and point to make for games that are coming out now and that will be coming out in the future. Because we, like you said, we have gotten to this point of like all of these games that present a problem and then are like, well, you can't really do anything about it, and then they don't give you a way to do something about it. I think that that's something going to be a little more prevalent in future games, especially. It's sort of like how Marvel took all of their bad guys from like vaguely brown people to the concept of grief and suffering, and then now suddenly we're like, well, everyone's getting bored of superhero movies, what do we do? And that's one of the biggest critiques of Marvel. I think that's a really salient point, and I think that's something we're going to see in the future. I don't know if it's a fair critique to put on games of the past, since they are so of their time, but that's a really good point to bring up in the overall discussion of science fiction and where it's heading. Did that make sense at all?
I mean, I was
Thank you.
following-
If you're at our panel on Sunday, I have a badge for you. That was a really good question.
Great question, yes.
Yes. Do you think?
I am an English major. So my
Hey!
question is, like, the genreification of science fiction,
Yes.
like how, like, are there specific, like, qualifiers or dequalifiers for it to be science fiction
I
genre, in
mean,
your opinion, other than
my
this
big
idea
thing
of power?
Yeah, my big thing is one of the things that makes it science fiction, because science fiction and fantasy get so tied up into each other, because a lot of people are like, science fiction is the future, not always true. Science fiction is in space, not always true. Yeah. My thing is that science fiction will always give you morally gray situations wherein there is no correct answer. The novel, whoever has written this, the narrative is never going to judge these, like, what is the right and wrong of this situation. You're always going, like with Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, like with Starship Troopers, you are always going to be in a situation where there is technically no right answer. You just have to figure out what you personally are okay with. I think that is one of the biggest hallmarks of science fiction, as opposed to like a lot of other fictions where like fantasy is a hallmark of there is a good guy, there is a bad guy, the good guy wins, the bad guy loses. Sometimes the bad guy wins, but there is a bad guy who is a bad guy because he is a bad guy, and we're not going to tell you anything more than he's a bad guy.
So it could really be, like, in current science fiction.
Yes.
Like, are there any other markers you feel that would, like, qualify it or disqualify it? Like, if it was a more like like, I don't know, I guess.
I would have to see like specific examples,
Okay, so
right?
it's-
Like
that's kind of what I feel like
Yeah.
I'm asking. Like, is it something where
it's
like
such
case
a
by
case by case like
Yeah.
this. Yeah, it's because we have so much literature now. It's all growing out into like sub-genres.
I would also like say
Oh, yeah,
that.
we gotta go.
Yes,
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Thank you for attending. If you have more questions, we will be out in the hallway. We're getting the sign that we have to leave. Thank you so much.